to get around.
Well, I like to get around. I've done a number of shows with some of the same hosts, and it's nice to continue to preach to a similar audience. But after a while, I think it kind of loses some of its intensity and effect, because it's I hate the phrase of preaching to the choir. It's an already converted audience. Well, let me back up a bit. I didn't finish my point. In the past, I've been preaching a lot with the same hosts to converted audiences who've already believe the story. They already understand the dollar is in trouble and kind of a counterfeit debt-based currency, etc. The dollar is siege, global rebellion, fractures, bond fraud and recognition, debt suffocation, debt overload, derivative dependence, absent bond buyers. Wow.
Yeah.
That is a mouthful.
That is a mouthful.
I would like to know, who was that British banker? Because where he lives, people die kind of easily. I mean, very easily. I speak from experience. I've been threatened twice. I was threatened in 2006 by Swiss bankers over the 9/11 incident, which is just a charade of stupidity in the official story. It was a bank heist. Bank heist by the globalists themselves. They hired Rockefeller and Bush to run the whole program. But I was also threatened by U.S. Homeland Security when I was at a Munich, Germany conference. Okay, the dollar is under siege. The dollar is in the process of severely losing its monopoly as trade payment. Okay, a country buys oil from another country. A shipment is made. They pay in U.S. Treasury bills. They pay in dollars. A big shipment of coal or wheat is made. They pay in dollars. The Indians supply Saudis with an IT project for insurance and healthcare. They pay in dollars. That is under siege. That is going away. And the dominant product within commerce and global trade, which is seeing change right now, is the oil market. The Chinese have just set up an RMB. I'll be using the term RMB. It's renminbi. It's the Chinese yuan. RMB stands for renminbi. It means people's money. It's a common term used to describe the Chinese currency. The Chinese in Shanghai have just set up, it's only been out for a week or so, the new RMB oil contract. It's being called the Petro-Yuan contract. They're going to require the Saudis to use it. It is as simple as that. They're going right after the heart of OPEC, which I believe is a dead entity. Some people might still cling to the notion, OPEC is still around. No, they just meet, and they meet in Austria, Vienna, and it's a very strange motivation for continuing the meetings. They like to get away from their Arab homeland. They like to get into Europe and just, have good meals and see a developed nation with an advanced society and advanced economy, but they also enjoy the, how should I put it, the more seamy side of life with hookers. They don't meet in order to have unison for anything. They haven't in 2 years agreed on anything that has stuck. They meet to get away from home and to have some fun, drinks, barbecue, whatever. Rub shoulders with other oil ministers. The OPEC is dead. And right now, there's something that's taking its place in the void. I call it the Russian Rosneft Consortium for oil. What the Russians have done is very clever. They've made a contract to buy Saudi oil, another contract to buy Iranian oil, another contract to buy Venezuelan oil. Why on earth would the #1 producer of oil on the planet have large agreements to buy oil? It's simple. They're creating an oil pool. They're taking charge, responsibility of mixing viscosity and removing contaminant levels. And in the process, they're selling the oil from the pool outside the dollar. So the Rosneft Oil Consortium is the new OPEC cartel. It is the non-dollar oil cartel, and it's powerful. The Saudis have a flimsy military. The Russians do not have a flimsy military. The Russians are joined at the hip with huge energy sales, oil and gas, with pipelines to China. The newest pipelines have been built using Chinese U.S. Treasury bonds. It's called indirect exchange. The dollar is losing its monopoly in the oil market and in trade payment generally. This is very powerful. I call it the dagger in the heart of the petrodollar. The petrodollar was set up in 1974. The Arabs, primarily the Saudis, made agreements with Henry Kissinger, who, by the way, was not representing the U.S. government as the State Department Secretary, but instead he was representing the Rothschild Institute. So we have a lot of pieces in place for wrecking the petrodollar.
What does that mean for us?
Pardon me?
What does that mean for us?
It means that we are going to have to create a new dollar, or we're going to have to enforce, say, half the world, half the planet Earth, half the globe, or say 60% of the globe. We're going to have to enforce a weak fiat dollar.
Gunboats.
Well, gunboat diplomacy, yes.
What is gunboats?
We force our will with military.
Okay.
I had a forecast in 2005 that in the late stages of the dollar's monopoly and power, dominion, they're going to defend the dollar with military force, and we're seeing it.
What kind of timeline until we really see something, do you think? I mean, really where it affects you and me and our pocketbook and what's going on here and in America?
The timeline is very difficult, but we're starting to see now immediately some effects from the dollar's lost monopoly. We've been seeing it now for a few months. The Chinese have set up a competitor to SWIFT, which is bank-to-bank transactions. The Chinese have set up this RMB oil contract. They're going to use that to force it down the Saudis' throats and buy oil with RMB. I'd like to point out the suicidal policy for these tariffs. I think that they're just not going to work. And I'll go further to say, Kate, that every single foreign policy initiative since 9/11 has been an absolute and dismal failure with a gigantic backfire to damage and isolate the United States. That is a very powerful, firm statement to make,
yes.
And I can back it up. How about the attempt to assassinate and depose Turkish President Erdogan? How about the Ukraine war, which we blamed on Russia but was executed by Langley and the Israeli Mossad in Kiev? How about the sanctions that we pulled off in the recent months, which absolutely abrogate and destroy the U.S. credibility and the international level because the Obama administration hammered out the Iran nuclear deal? We've dishonored it already. We haven't honored a single treaty in 40 years. How about the NATO treaty not to militarize the borders, but we put missiles pointing at Russia on every border, and we call them defensive when they're pointing to Russia? Broken treaty again. How about the foreign policy of putting sanctions on German companies that are involved in Nord Stream 2, the Baltic Sea gas pipeline to Russia, for any German companies in finance or construction when we don't have jurisdiction there? How about the 10-year-old criminalization of UBS and Credit Suisse, which were banks, and we claimed that they were, full of tax dodging and Iran sanction workarounds? Oh, no, that was really quite different. The whole world distrusts the United States and London because those prosecutions against UBS and Credit Suisse were designed to enable U.S., New York, and London bankers to steal Arab gold in the Swiss bullion banks operated by UBS. How about the foreign policy of snuffing out Gaddafi? I mean, I don't care if he was a good guy or a bad guy. He was actually a rather honored fellow with a track record of tremendous philanthropy and lots of different projects like the gigantic canals in Libya for water supply. No. Hillary decided, with NATO support, that Gaddafi was going to be involved in a gold-backed dinar for North African oil sales. So he had to be murdered. Since when do we have the right to murder heads of state in order to support the dollar? Since when?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Since when?
Yeah.
We've done it a lot, it seems like.
Mm-hmm.
And it's...
And the people of the United States, and that's where I so separate the people from what is done in our name.
They're not doing it for the people of the United States.
Right.
They're doing it for the syndicate that took control at 9/11, the fascist globalists who took control. They stole the gold at the World Trade Center Bank. Does anybody know in your listening audience that the largest private bank in the world in September 2011 was the World Trade Bank? They stole it all. And they blamed a group of young Arabs who couldn't fly a Cessna, who just happened to leave at the scene of the crime all their passports. Even though it was a meltdown of tremendous proportions, the plastic-lined driver's licenses were all there to be read. It's just an absolute astonishing, ludicrous story. And that was the basis of my first death threat.
Was a lot of it hidden in
it?
Building 7? Was a lot of it hidden there? Because Building 7 went down at like 5 o'clock in the afternoon. No plane hit it, and all of a sudden it went down, demolished. Was a lot of it in the basement? I remember reviewing something.
No, it was in the World Trade Center, Building 1 and 2. The Building 7 had something very different. It had U.S. Treasury bond fraud data.
Okay.
And it had J.P. Morgan's involvement in Enron and all that data.
Okay.
There were a lot of dead bodies in the lobby when that building went down.
Terrific.
Most of what you see with large-scale U.S. Financial transactions, most of it is a crime scene. You could go on and on and on. I like telling a brief story about why the Chinese are so angry at us. When the Hong Kong was handed over, the Hong Kong region was handed over to China, we thought, well, let's make a big deal out about this. Let's do a lot of different things. Well, we agreed to have foreign direct investment in the tens of billions for Chinese industrial rebuilding, or construction rather. And in return, the Chinese said, hey, look, we're willing to lend you, lease gold that you wish, but we're going to attach an income tax stream, the IRS bond, because we don't trust you. The United States realized that they needed to keep the game going and they needed to lease foreign gold. So they leased about 5,000 tons of gold from China, and the Chinese collateralized it with J.P. Morgan's headquarters, which also contained the gold vault tied underground with the Federal Reserve. We reneged on that like we do everything. We have broken every single treaty. We broke the treaties with the Native American Indians. We've broken them all. We're the exceptional nation. Exceptional in the sense of corrupt and violent war crimes. All right, so the Chinese took control of the J.P. Morgan headquarters, bought it out for a song, like for 20 cents, 30 cents on the dollar, have control now of the gold vault, have control at the same time of the IMF in Europe through contributions where the U.S. does not make any more contributions. And all of it spewed a tremendous amount of resentment by the Chinese, who announced in 2006 that they were going to, how do they put it? We're going to consolidate with treasuries. Read between the lines. We're going to sell Fannie Mae bonds. What happened a year later? Fannie Mae collapsed. Lehman Brothers was killed by J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs, which bought a few $1 billion worth of bonds and never paid for them. Okay, so the Chinese had vengeance in the form of killing Fannie Mae. Then they turned around and said again, we're going to focus on short-term treasuries. Read between the lines. That was 2011. Read between the lines to say the Chinese are going to dump their long-term treasury bonds. That's called Operation Twist under Bernanke at the Fed. They didn't let us know exactly what that was all about. It's the Chinese who in 2006 dumped Fannie Mae and in 2011 dumped long-term treasuries. So in came the derivatives to save the day. Morgan Stanley put on 10 trillion or 9 trillion worth in a 6-month period. And the U.S. press heralded a flight to safety, which did not exist because foreigners were dumping. Okay, the whole thing is a crime scene, Kate. Mm-hmm. It's disgusting. It's despicable. We're the most dishonorable nation in modern history for our financial dealings, and for our vaccine dealings, and for our GMO food seed dealings, and for our fracking dealings, and for our chemtrail dealings. Shall I go on? These are the 7 bowls of the apocalypse.
Do we have any gold? Is there anything we can fight with them? Any way to balance this?
No, we don't have any gold at all. The gold that is portrayed and charaded in Fort Knox is all tungsten with gold plating. It's for show. If you don't do a spectrogram analysis, you might think it's actually gold. If you're dumb enough, yeah. The people of Kentucky are rather smart. They may not be extremely educated, but they know when a truck arrives, an armored truck arrives riding high and leaves riding low, that it's loaded with gold. And that's what happened for several months in groups of 3, 4, and 5 armored trucks every single morning, every single afternoon. That was the Rubin administration. Okay, they stole the gold. Does the United States have any gold? Well, yeah. We got a couple barrels full of old coins. We might have $1 billion worth of gold coins. Do we have 8,500 or 8,700 tons of gold? Absolutely not. One of the most distressful conclusions made by, I'm not sure who it was. I think it was the Treasury Secretary or the Commerce Secretary in the United States under Trump, was their realization that the United States doesn't have any gold. They did their audit, they did their inspection, they looked not only at Fort Knox, but they looked at, what's the place, the U.S. Army, West Point, the Army Academy. And they concluded we don't have more than a few drops of gold. So we cannot go to the gold standard. You know, when Americans think about, someday we might go to the gold standard, that'd be kind of good. Well, you got to think this through a little bit more. The United States doesn't have any gold to do a gold standard. And even if we did, the $600 billion annual trade deficit would result in 13,000 tons of gold forfeited in the first year. We need to reindustrialize the nation, pretty much according to what Donald Trump ran a campaign on in 2016. Does anybody remember the infrastructure $1 trillion plan that he had? No, that's all pretty much gone by the wayside as we increased the military budget. We're not even on the right path toward a gold standard. We don't have the requisite industry to avoid export damage. And, the trade deficit's going in the wrong direction. It was $550 billion last year. It's going to be somewhere between $600 and $650 billion this year. While at the same time, our federal trade deficit is getting worse, which is proof positive that we're in a recession for the 12th consecutive year. We like to call all that inflation understated inflation, and what we understate as inflation we call growth. We still have 6, 7, 8% price inflation. We still call it 2 and 3% inflation, so we're lying by 3 or 4%. We still have a recession. My advice to people is it's high time to sell the paper assets that the Fed has illegally, illicitly, with Wall Street support, pumped up. Sell high. I mean, does anybody understand the concept of sell high, buy low? No, we just buy high and buy higher like a bunch of morons. We've done it cycle after cycle with asset bubbles, and it's really quite pathetic. People need to sell 80 to 90% of their paper assets and buy gold and silver bars and coins. And do not buy GLD and do not buy SLV. Those are Wall Street constructs to defraud you, because they're using your money to short gold and silver. The dollar's going to experience hard times. Only those people who are out of debt and who have a majority of their wealth in hard assets like gold, silver, oil deposits, farmland. I don't know anybody who owns a copper mine, but if someone owns a copper mine in Idaho, they're going to do very well. Those who are going to stick around with their mutual fund and IRA and whatever with the elevated and pumped up stocks is going to be a loser. This is not going to end well. We've gotten some rumblings with the bond market, and what it spells is some international trouble for the dollar. This is the problem. The global community is revolting against the dollar. They don't like the many wars on the U.S. credit card. They don't like the bond market support by derivatives. There's international dumping, like $300 billion, $400 billion every 12 months in Treasury bonds, yet the Treasury bond is a rather stable market. We should be at 8 and 10%, but we're not. We're not. We continue this charade, and the global market is upset. They don't like what they see, and now they're even more upset because the U.S. government trade deficit is just ballooning. It's like $1.2 trillion and heading higher. They're looking for China for leadership, and in the process, what we are going to see forming is what's already begun, but it's not much in the Western press, and certainly not in the controlled U.S. press, and that is the Eurasian trade zone coming into shape, coming into form. The whole One Belt, One Road, the Belt and Road Initiative, whatever you want to call it, the New Silk Road, it is an $8 trillion table of projects. None of it is in the dollar. And the U.S. is just now beginning to get a couple of its industrial giants like GE and Honeywell and a couple of others involved in some of the contracts because a lot of it is going to Russian, Chinese, and German companies. We're being shut out from our own stupidity. We don't want a non-dollar system. So the non-dollar system is saying, we don't want you either.
Is there some signs to see that we would notice? We would go, oh, warning sign, like a huge warning sign as far as we might just, that might just jump off the cliff tomorrow as far as our whole economy. How do you feel about that? How would you answer that?
I don't have a good timeline. Do you have a good firm idea of the next wars that the United States is going to wage in order to obstruct the plan?
Nope. Only those that don't bank with the Rothschilds.
Well,
but you know what I mean. Yeah.
Neither do I.
Yeah.
Are your listeners aware that in January of 2014 there was a global reset treaty signed in order to phase out the dollar as the global reserve currency and the trade payment standard? And the United States turned around and broke it in February of the same year to create the Ukraine war. That's all we do. We break treaties. There was a Minsk truce, an agreement to end the violence and warfare in Ukraine, and we broke that too. We don't know how the United States is going to create another war, offer more sanctions, impose more trade tariffs, but whatever we do will backfire. We imposed a tariff against the Chinese for steel. They turned around and canceled a grain deal and did it with Russia. They turned around and canceled a soybean deal with the United States, and they're doing it with Brazil. Everything we do backfires in a grand failure on the foreign front. We have no idea what we're doing. We're living in the past. We're living as though we still have global dominance, full spectrum dominance, a la Dick Cheney. That went away 15 years ago. There have been plenty of demos that have caused Pentagon generals to soil themselves. It has to do with the Onyx and Sunburn missile with 10 times the accuracy of the Cruise. The Cruise is a 25-year-old missile. It's obsolete. The Chinese are now acquiring some of the Russian technology in their military, but the Russians are leading. They've got some good friends. Won't get into it, but they now disable the U.S. military's Aegis tracking and targeting system. We've had examples. They're all over the place.
Yeah, with the Donald Cook. So
USS Donald Cook, and there have been more. That's just one of a few. The U.S. Pentagon generals know full well we don't have military dominance. it's kind of pathetic to watch because we don't know what's going on anymore.
Barring war and disruption of the whole system, where do you see gold and silver going?
You know, these are very general questions. I prefer more specific questions, but I don't know how much the United States is going to infiltrate, murder, and bomb Shanghai. Do you?
Mm-hmm.
No, that's a good question.
We don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how
we can.
successful this is going to be with what I call the Shanghai Triangle. They created an oil-gold contract several months ago that the Russians are using. They're selling oil to China, and they're taking out gold. They've got their Sberbank in Beijing that's walking out with the gold and transferring it to the Russian central bank. They've also now got the RMB oil contract, so now they've got RMB oil and gold. So I don't know how much the Chinese are going to put their foot in the pedal to the metal. Do you?
I don't. No.
Okay, well, there are a lot of unanswered questions. I'm not trying to be disrespectful or rude, but we just don't know how violent the Rothschild element of the U.S. government and Europe is going to be for this upstart Chinese initiative to do away with the dollar standard. The United States and China made an agreement 3 years ago to introduce a new dollar and to devalue it 50%. And the U.S. said, we can't do that in one shot, we can do it in two. Well, here's some neat devaluation math for you. If you do a 70% devaluation, you're retaining 70%. If you do a 30% devaluation, you're doing a 70% retaining of value. Do another 30% devaluation of the new dollar on top of that, and you've got 70% times 70%, which is 49%. There's your 50% devaluation. I think we're going to have severe import problems when the United States is told, hey, look, we don't want treasury bills if you're printing them like Zimbabwe or some absurd South American country. We don't want your treasury bills for a container vessel. We don't want your treasury bills for a vessel tanker full of oil. We don't want your treasury bills for a foreign contract with consultants and whatever, like in the energy field, you know, for seismic drilling and all that. And the United States is going to be in a quandary. The U.S. government's going to have a difficult time soon. It could be months. I don't know. Don't know the timetable. I know the event schedule, kind of like Schwarzkopf promoted back in 1990. We don't have a timetable, people. We have an event schedule. Okay, he was very astute. He knew what was going on. He knew that A had to happen before B. B had to happen before C. We're seeing it now. And a big event was the Shanghai Oil RMB contract. Now we get to see the effect. Let's see if the United States can import foreign oil and still pay treasury bills. I don't think they're going to be able to do it with Nigeria much longer. They don't import anything from Iran. That's a completely different game. Iran is going to make sure the oil price doesn't get out of control because at one point several months ago, they had 80, that's 80 tankers full of oil floating around near their ports. They never stopped producing. They just didn't sell. They're loading up on inventory. Okay, the United States is going to have a problem. We're not going to be able to pay for imported products because we're issuing a counterfeit type of currency with no backing except debt, which is getting out of control and being reinforced by bond buyers in interest rate swap derivatives. The whole world is watching this. Chinese are making sure that everybody understands how the U.S. is paying its bills. And it's going to get worse. So the United States is going to have to issue a new dollar, and there will be $2. One is the internationally held dollar, and one will be the domestic new dollar. I affectionately call it the new Scheisse dollar. And that term has curiously been adopted by numerous analysts in the financial realm that almost make me giggle. Because Scheiss is the German word for excrement. That's where we just move the double S and make it a T. It's nasty, but it's going to be a third world currency because the United States is going to try to back it with phony gold and claim that it's real gold and try to doctor the independent auditors to come from Switzerland so that they can falsify the audit reports and still claim that it's real gold. So soon after they create this falsely backed new dollar, the United States is going to have revealed, they're just going to have their skirt ripped off. And it'll be quite clear that the United States has fake gold. There's going to be little independent reports of a heisted couple or 3 tungsten bars of gold out of Fort Knox. They're going to undergo spectrograph tests. They're going to be revealed as 98% tungsten. And questions are going to come, where's all the gold? Where did it get stolen? Who did it? And the answer is Bush, Clinton, Rubin. We might possibly have some of it stolen or confiscated back by executive order by our current president. I don't know how successful he's going to be.
Okay.
What he's trying to do is have an executive order for seized assets for those people who are involved in sex, slavery, and child murder, satanic rings. It's extremely widespread. It's not 20 or 30 individuals. It's more like 1,000.